Now I'm happy to introduce our first keynote speaker, Vance Taylor. Vance is the Chief of the Office of Access and Functional Needs at the California Governor's Office of Emergency Services. He is responsible for ensuring the needs of individuals with disabilities and persons with access or functional needs are identified before, during, and after disasters. Welcome, Vance. Can I invite you on?
Absolutely. Thanks very much, Natalie. It's great to be here. Es un placer estar aquí con todos esta noche. I just want to start by letting everybody know that, yes, I'm the Chief of the Office of Access and Functional Needs, but I want to talk about why my office even exists. My office exists because there's a recognition in California that, historically speaking, as a nation, we have not done an adequate job of addressing the needs of individuals with access or functioning. It's older adults, people with disabilities, individuals from underrepresented communities. We haven't built considerations faced by those populations within the way that we plan, prepare, respond, and recover from disasters. And we don't have to look any further than Hurricane Katrina. That's really what put this issue, I think, at the front of the national consciousness. It's because during Hurricane Katrina, we watched on TV as 70% of everyone who perished came from an underrepresented group. And when we asked ourselves the difficult question, how could this be? Why was there such a disproportionate impact? What came back was that emergency managers, as well-intentioned as they are, were not actually planning with the communities they serve. They were making assumptions about the communities that they serve without actually having lived experience. And because of that, gaps were built into our emergency management system. It was because of that we saw that, for example, the way information was communicated had gaps in it. Information was communicated at press conferences without consideration of the fact that not everybody was going to be able to hear the message, that some individuals were deaf or hard of hearing. And so there was no ASL interpreter, and those people weren't able to get access to life-saving information. The information was presented, and an official would point to an evacuation map and say, go here for safety. But people who were blind or had low vision had no way to access or process that information. And so their lives were placed at risk. Information was presented, but it was only presented in English without consideration of the fact that many individuals within our communities don't have English as a primary language, or maybe don't speak English altogether. And so those individuals weren't able to know where to go to maintain their health and their security and their independence. And as a result, we saw an increase in human suffering and an increase in loss of life among those community populations. We saw this during evacuations as well, where plans said, hey, go and we'll evacuate everybody in a school bus. Well, that's great, but what if you don't have a way to get to the school bus? Right? So people who were transportation disadvantaged didn't have a way to get to the evacuation site. Or people like myself who use a power wheelchair would show up and there was no bus with a ramp or a lift. And so without that accessible transportation to leave a disaster area, people had to choose. Do I stay in my wheelchair and remain in this impact area and hope that I'll be okay? Or do I get picked up out of my chair and put onto a bus, knowing that when I arrive wherever it is we're going, I'm not going to have my legs with me? And that impacts more than just health and safety. It also impacts dignity. What a terrible choice for people to have to make. When we looked at shelters, we saw that people would come to a shelter and everything, all the signs were in English. And so if you couldn't read, or if you didn't know English, then you didn't know where to go to get food. You didn't know where to go to have services. You didn't have a way to ask people for health related resources or assets or programs or services. And because of that, again, human suffering increased. People didn't stay at shelters. They tried their best to do it on their own and came up short. And that's why we saw such a disproportionate impact. And so to get in front of this, California said, we're going to create an office. It'll be led by a senior level executive. That person will have a twofold mission. As chief, my job is to identify with our partners, with our communities, with our stakeholders, the needs and considerations that all Californians have before, during, and after a disaster. And then once we understand that, it's to work in partnership to include, to address, and to integrate those needs throughout every facet of the emergency management system. Now, California leads the nation in inclusive planning, but that doesn't mean we're done. It doesn't mean we're there yet. There's still a lot of room left to improve. And so we push to do that. Now, climate change presents an existential threat to our ability to meet the needs of all our communities. Because what we see isn't just an increase in the number of disasters. It's an increase in the scope and scale and frequency and devastation of those disasters. And so we deal with more wildfires every single year. And the numbers seem to be exponentially growing. We deal with more extreme weather events every single year. We deal with more power outages and the impacts to individuals with access and functional needs. The impacts to underrepresented communities are felt in very real and impactful ways. If you rely on power, for example, for a respirator, or to keep your medicine cool, or if your food goes bad after you lose power and you don't have enough income to replace it, then you can see that not only is it inconvenient to not have power, but it jeopardizes your well-being and your lifestyle. If you rely on power and you rely on all kinds of resources and assistive technologies and devices, then what we're talking about here isn't just the risk of having to rough it, but it's in making decisions and choices that have to do with whether or not you're going to survive. So until we can look at how do we address the fact that there's more fires and more disasters, and how do we ensure that as those disasters hit us, that we work our way through them through a lens of equity, through the lens of social justice, with the commitment to leaving no one behind, then we'll continue to suffer these impacts. And so what I would ask is, as we go through and look at climate change, as we go through and look at this issue, that we do so in partnership with one another, that we each commit to lift our communities, to lift ourselves, our neighbors, our friends, our families, our loved ones, because we have to be the change we need. You know, and I know that no one's going to do it for us. We will fail or we will succeed, but we'll do it together. And so I ask that you lift, and I will lift. And together, our communities will ascend. So thank you for letting me be here. I appreciate it. Es un placer, un honor, y espero que todo va bien con ustedes en este día y en los días siguientes. Muchas gracias.
Thank you so much, Vance. We deeply appreciate the work that you're doing and to help us guide us through this really heavy lift. You know, we've seen for too long that communities of color and people with disabilities have been on the front lines of disasters. And there's always this talk of resilience, and it's like, we don't need resilience. We need the support that we need. So thank you so much for helping to do this work.
Absolutely. Thank you.